Before cell phones, laptops, and a desktop computer, music was often the only entertainment people had, particularly in the rural coves and mountaintops of the southern Appalachian Mountains. People worked hard from sunup to sundown trying to squeeze a living from their side hill farms. Never an easy task. As a result, they looked forward to corn huskings, molasses making, and other group activities where everyone in the community came together over a common task. Almost always somebody would bring a fiddle and a banjo to liven things up and to make the work go a little faster. And Lord have mercy, if they knew that a local dance was occurring come Saturday night, they were ready to go, even if they had to walk 5 or 6 miles to get to it. Entertainment was that hard to come by. The type of music they listened to was a product of many styles, including English ballads, Irish jigs, the German singing tradition, and many, many others. The instruments they used were predominantly fiddles and banjos, an instrument of African origin. Around 1900, the guitar started gaining popularity. As a small rural Appalachian county, Alleghany fit right into this tradition that is often referred to as old-time mountain music. Indeed, Alleghany County lay in a unique position at the top of the North Carolina Blue Ridge, where its musicians were exposed to the musical traditions of Galax, Virginia to the north, a hotbed of old-time music, Ashe County to the west, and Surry County and the Piedmont to the east. The result was a people and a music that reflected the overall love and traditions of old-time mountain music and dance, but sometimes with a peculiar Alleghany twist.
Well, I like the stories they tell in it, and I also like the melody, and I especially like the banjos and the fiddle players, and I like it. I like other music too, but I like old time music. It's just part of the heritage around here. I mean, it's part of our way of life, part of what we grew up listening to, and the older I get, the more I like it.
I've played music since I was 5 years old. It was in my family, and this, the area here, Grayson, Alleghany, Ashe, and eastern Tennessee, all of this whole Blue Ridge area right here is an absolute hotbed of old-time music, and there's musicians everywhere. And
well, I don't know. It's a different kind of, it comes from the heart. You got to feel it to play it, and it's enjoyable.
My father played the banjo, and his brother played the guitar, and his other brother played the violin, and they'd play around when they'd get together and have jams, and I was real small, but that's my first memory of music.
And I'd hear that every night. Every night when we went to bed before I'd go to sleep, I'd hear my mother and father singing, and they loved it. And it grew on the children. We all loved it. There was 8 of us children.
But Mother and Dad both played musical instruments, and people would come in and they would clear out a room so that we could dance, and they'd set up and we would dance. And so we would rotate, maybe 5 or 6 families would rotate different weekends. And it would go all the way around, then come back to my parents, and we'd start all over again.
And I've heard my grandpa talk about he and his brother. My grandpa's brother played the harmonica and banjo some, and fiddle, and my grandpa was a banjo player. And I've heard them tell tales about how far they would walk and carry their instruments to the schoolhouse in York Ridge, which is 6 or 7 miles away. And they would do that to go play at a party at the schoolhouse, where people could dance, And then they'd go to people's house. I've heard them talk about if they had a big party, they'd go to somebody's house who had the biggest house. And sometimes they would put that fiddle and banjo in the doorway and, between 2 rooms. And they'd roll back a rug and clean the furniture out of the way so they could dance in both rooms. And that was a pretty genius thing to do. The sound would go both ways, and I've heard them talk about that and just talk about all the trouble they went to go do that. And I'm sure they never ever got paid. There wasn't no such thing as paying a musician, I don't think, in those days.
And it might not be more than 2 or 3 neighbors or some family members or just good friends that would come, to make music with Daddy. But sometimes it'd last all night long.
Old-time mountain music didn't need a fancy stage to be played on. In fact, it rarely, if ever, was. It was strictly played in schools, barns, and other informal settings, including people's front porches, parlors, and kitchens.
And they'd sit and make music all night long. And I started dancing when I was 3 years old. Now, I didn't dance all night long, but I'd dance a goodly portion of the night away.
Oh gosh, I can remember my father flat-footing. I can remember that whenever I was just tiny, and he was good at it. It was just a dance that they did. Kind of broke them whenever everyone was square dancing. Well, then they would do a tune, and a lot of the people would get up and do a little flat-footing, and it was just something that added to the evening.
Somebody around would have a fiddle. A fiddle's what you needed for square dancing. The music from a guitar doesn't do it much for square dancing.
Cash money was hard to come by in the Appalachian Mountains in the early and mid-20th century. As a result, if people needed something, they made it. That was a farm mentality, and it applied to instruments. If you wanted a fiddle, you made one. If you wanted a banjo, you might catch and skin a groundhog and borrow your mother's flour sifter. Whittle a neck out of a 2x4 and you were ready to play.
Yeah, that's what my grandpa, that's what my dad did on their farm stuff. You know, if they needed a sled, wagon, or whatever it was, you know, I guess they couldn't afford to go out and buy a lot of stuff, and they all were crafts people, or you sort of had to be. Almost everybody was, at least somewhat. And so you made what you needed, and that's always been my mentality about these instrument making. If it takes an awful lot of practice to turn out one that looks like an old Martin or something, but you can certainly do it if you work at it hard enough and practice. And I did everything in the world to try to be able to make an instrument. I slipped my mom's dresser drawer bottom out and soaked the veneer off of it, and so it was thin and I could bend, and I worked my whole school vacation on, trying to make a guitar out of that. And the only glue I had or could find, and all the tools I had or anything, was what was around the farm. And everybody around here were farmers. That's how they made their living. And the only glue that I could find or had ever seen used is some rubber stuff my dad put weather stripping on his truck doors with. And when I glued that guitar together with that and worked my whole summer vacation like all summer, and in my spare time, other than when I wasn't farming, and when August, even up here in the mountains, there's some heat and humidity, sets in on that old rubber glue. In the spring, it was still left in that old walnut veneer. That thing just spread out, blossomed like a morning glory. Just totally came apart. That was in the 60s. When I got that first guitar made. And I used to make them out of cardboard boxes before that. When you'd go to the store, they'd send your groceries back in a box, and I had one that snuff had come in. And it's got a date on it, 1959, on that. And I put fish line on whittled a neck out of a piece of a 2x4, and I put strings on it out of that fish line enough till I could play a little bit, Not very good, but I could play it,
Besides listening to live music, people's lives were changed forever when they could start listening to it over the radio. The first radios in the 1930s were battery operated, which meant that you couldn't listen to them for very long without running the batteries down. But every second of sound was precious. If your family didn't own a radio, you made sure you invited yourself to somebody's house that did, particularly on Saturday nights when the Grand Ole Opry came to town.
My parents had a radio. That's one of those battery-powered radios that you talked about. A lot of the neighbors gather in on Saturday night, tune in to WSM, Grand Ole Opry. That was a very popular station, especially on Saturday night. That until most everybody got a radio, seemed like our house was the gathering place for the neighbors to join in to listen to WSM Grand Ole Opry.
Oh, well, you had to create your own entertainment. And, when I was young, I guess I was 9, 10 years old before we got a TV. And it was the radio, you know. We listened to the Grand Ole Opry, and we listened to WPAQ in Mount Airy, and also the radio station Galax, up until the early 60s when they opened a radio station here in Sparta. So, you know, that was our entertainment. You had to provide your own entertainment.
Electric radio, it was a battery type. Like an old car battery or something, you know, and I can remember it being corroded and everything, and you have to wiggle the wires to get to hear the Grand Ole Opry on Saturday night.
Well, when I was growing up, of course, all we had was a radio, and I used to sit beside of it on Saturday night listening to the Grand Ole Opry, and I'd pretend I was strumming a guitar. Well, my grandmother, Granny Sally, we had one of these old hand-cranked RCA Victrolas. She swapped that to a family for me a guitar. Do you think I ever learned how to play that guitar? No. Do you think what that Victrola would be worth today? Yes.
My daddy liked the Grand Ole Opry. Now he was really he liked Grand Ole Opry, flatfoot dancing and all that stuff. He used to clown around a lot with that. But my sister and I, we like rhythm and blues. Rhythm and blues is what they called it back then. And we would listen to Ernie's Record Mart in Nashville, Tennessee on Saturday night after Bill and Charlie Monroe went off. Oh, Daddy would let us have the radio and keep it on for an hour. 1 hour.
The radio was a window on the world for lots of rural folks, including those in the hills and hollers of Alleghany County. Suddenly, they were able to listen to different styles and types of music that they had never heard before, and it influenced them in the music they played. Old-time music, heavily prevalent in the early days of radio, was evolving into bluegrass and later country. All these styles are still played in the county today.
And so that's a big difference in that style of music. Old-time music is, I think, based mostly for dancing and rhythm, and the bluegrass is a performance thing where people sing or lead, and the instrument get to take solos, and I like both of them equally. You know, it's like it's so much fun to do either one.
Well, old time is more or less for dancing. Bluegrass is kind of for listening more, you know. It's but old time is better dance music.
I know the difference in the style. You know, the old time music, the whole band gets together and plays together, and the fiddle and banjo mainly keep the melody of the tune going and a beat, and you know, the guitar players, even like my grandpa, they didn't have a guitar player, and they just, you know, you can play perfectly good old time music with a fiddle and banjo. You know, they sing, you know, but mostly the singing parts are just they jump in and do a line, and then they go back to their, you know, their beat and the old time sound. And the bluegrass music, it's based a lot on singing. They sing songs.
One of the most successful early bands to come out of Alleghany County were the Red Fox Chasers. They made numerous records in the early days of the industry and got to play on radio quite often. Better than most, they demonstrated the two halves of the Appalachian music tradition: harmony singing and fast-paced instrumentals.
Well, Alleghany shares geographically a very unique spot, and I think it's very nicely seen in the Red Fox Chasers. I think they're the perfect Alleghany County band because they're a blend of different styles. And that's really what you get in Alleghany. It's a crossroad. You know, it's got Galax to the north, which has produced lots of old-time musicians. It's got Ash to the west, which has produced its fair share too, and Surrey County in the Round Peak area, you know, to its east. So it's surrounded by these pockets of different musical styles that are able to kind of cross-pollinate right here in the middle. And so Alleghany, I think, like you see with the Red Fox Chasers, is able to produce people that can borrow from various styles and kind of, you know, create something new. And that's what all this music has been about since the beginning. It's all cross-pollination of different influences. It has been since its inception. And Alleghany is just a good place to see it because it sits right on this nice geographic sweet spot between all these different pockets of styles. They recorded a lot of songs by that standard. They recorded, I think, 48 sides. It may have been a little bit less than that, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 48 sides were recorded by them which is a pretty impressive number. There's very few bands from this region that can touch that. Most of them were more like the Henpecked Husbands. They'd record 2 sides and go home and, just be fond to have, just be glad of the memories. But the Red Fox Chasers made a pretty good run of it. They had about 48 of these sides, and they've been re-released on LP by County Records because they're a very interesting band from the period because they so nicely blend these two halves of the Appalachian tradition, which is the instrumental half of the fiddle banjo style and the vocal harmony half. And so I think they're a very interesting band to listen to today for that reason.
The biggest music star to ever come out of Alleghany County was Franklin Delano Reeves, named after President Roosevelt shortly after he won the Democratic Convention to run for president. Affectionately known as Del Reeves to his many fans, he grew up in a musical family that had a long history of playing old-time music on both sides. Del had a musical career that spanned over 40 years and included 55 charted hits along with 2 top 10 singles.
Okay, Dad, like I say, being the eldest of all the sons, Dale was born on July the 12th, and that was right in the middle of hay season. So Dad had some of the younger boys out in the hayfield stacking hay, cutting and stacking hay. So Granddaddy, after Dale was born during the fairly early morning hours, he went running to the hayfield and told Dad and the rest of the boys, said, well, you've got 11-pound, 2-ounce brother. Said, we've named him Franklin Delano Reeves. And Daddy just looked over at Cleo and Kyle and said, go get him. He's big enough to put up hay.
Nobody from Alleghany County was as successful as Del Reeves. That's the only Grand Ole Opry member that's ever from Alleghany County was Del.
Well, Del Reeves was from Sparta, and he's obviously, a pretty big name country singer from the 60s and 70s. He was from Sparta. He went to school at Piney Creek. He got started playing on the radio at a young age, and then something happened to him, which happened to a lot of musicians at the period, which is kind of what characterized the whole sudden rise of country as the commercial genre we now know today is World War II. As a result of World War II, he ends up in California, and he had been playing on the radio around here, so he just took that interest with him out west to a new audience. He starts playing for on the radio out west. He gets hooked up, I believe, with Capitol Records, who were stationed on the West Coast. They were, instrumental in kind of the Bakersfield sound and kind of the West Coast country. So he gets roped in with Capitol Records, and they start recording and releasing some of his material. Obviously, his biggest hit was "The Girl on the Billboard," which is kind of this song most people can hear on, traditional country radio stations. He followed that with a derivative copy called "The Bells of the Southern Belle." Just have heard him on records, don't know about him, is he was a really good performer. He was, he did impersonations. He kind of had this, he had a really good Roy Acuff impersonation where he could sound like Roy Acuff, and he'd do silly things like sing, "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog," and this very traditional Roy Acuff style voice, who was, the old solemn father of country music on the Grand Ole Opry. And so he would do impersonations, and he was a very energetic performer. He was not very stoic in his demeanor. He was not trying to cast himself as this kind of troubled artist or this, strong, silent type. He was really willing to ham it up and joke and do silly stuff at his own, expense for the sake of amusing the audience.
One great thing about Del was he didn't forget about his roots or about helping others. Late in his life, he contacted his friend, local musician and radio disc jockey, J.D. Higgins, about putting on an annual Alleghany concert to help an area charity. This event became known as the Del Reeves Homecoming and brought numerous Grand Ole Opry stars to the county, including Little Jimmy Dickens, John Conley, and the Stanley Brothers.
Del said to me one day, he was here at the house, and he says, "J.D., he said, we ought to do something together here," but he said, "What are we going to do with the money we raise?" And I said, "Del, I don't know." And so he went back to Nashville and he talked to some different folks there, and he called me one day and he said, JD, let's start a scholarship fund. Let's start and I said, okay, that sounds all right to me. So we started the Dale Reeves Scholarship Fund, and that's what we did with the money. So I put Dale and Jack Martin, which at that time was chairman of the school board, together on the phone. And, you know, the three of us worked it out, and we decided Dale said, let's go. JD said, do you think we can do this 10 years? I said, I don't know, we'll take a shot at it and see. So we set it out eventually to do the Dale Reeves Homecoming for 10 years. And as it turned out, we were able to do it 10 years. Dale was able to be here 9 of the 10. The last year, Dale had some health problems. He had COPD and really had a serious breathing problem. And when you make your living singing, that makes a difference. And then he told me, after Dale said, JD, now if you want to continue this homecoming thing, even without me, he said, that's all right. He said, you can do that. And I'll tell you the way I answered him. I said, Reeves, let me tell you something, buddy. I said, we started this together and we're going to end it together. So that's the way it ended. But we had a very successful run. I want to say many thanks to all the folks in all the surrounding counties and the support they gave the Dale Reeves Homecoming for years, and the support they've given me for years as far as that goes.
Over the years, music has been a constant in Alleghany County. Sure, it has changed and evolved in style and format over the years, but that is the nature of any living thing. It even suffered a rust spell in the 1970s and 80s when traditional old-time music seemed to be dying out. Starting in the 1990s, it came roaring back. Efforts were made to get more kids and adults involved, and the result is that today there isn't hardly a night in the week where there isn't a local jam session open to the public. One of the oldest of these traditional showcases is the Alleghany Jubilee, operating in a 1920s movie theater. Opened by Ernest and Agnes Joines in the mid-1990s, it features area musicians every Tuesday and Saturday night. With a great big old dance floor, it also caters to local folks who want to do a little flat-footing and square dancing.
Well, it's just, you know, it's the heritage. It's been here a long time. I was up Pigeon Forge and went to the Smoky Mountain Jubilee, and it was impressed, and we decided to try it here at Sparta, so that's the way we got started. They come Winston, Galax, Elkin, Wilkesboro, all around Charlotte. Never know who's going to show up.
You know, when they come in here, they feel like they're at home. They do. They say, now, you know, when we come here, we just have the best time. Everybody loves everybody.
Another popular area music venue is the Crouse House. Every Monday night, rain or shine, area musicians gather to play and jam. One room in the house is reserved for those folks who want to play old-time music. The other room is for those wanting to play bluegrass. You never know who will show up, but everyone is welcome, and you always know it will be good.
We've been going to the Crouse House every Monday night for probably 22 or 3 years area. It's a park here in the county that lets us ask people in to play on Monday nights. And I go in and open up and make 80 cups of coffee, 2 coffee cups, and everybody will bring cookies and brownies and pies and cakes and stuff. The friendship of having everyone there and talking about their instruments and bringing what they're working on. A lot of them build their instruments and they bring them and show them.
Another factor that has contributed to the resurgence of folks playing and continuing the old-time and bluegrass musical traditions is the Junior Appalachian Musicians Program, otherwise known as the Jam Program. This very popular program introduces area kids to traditional Appalachian music by providing them with instruments and expert instruction.
I was going to do my regular weekly guidance program for third grades, and as I walked into the third grade classroom, Henry Thorne, who was the then elementary school music teacher, back when we had regular elementary school music, was in the third grade class, and he was holding up pictures of instruments and telling kids this is the strings family. And I talked to him after class and I said, you know, Henry, I've got all of those instruments. Let's combine music and guidance next week and maybe put all 3 third grades together and let the kids hear the instruments and play the instruments. And he agreed. As the kids were getting up with their turn, there was a young woman. She was in 3rd grade. She had been retained in 2nd grade, had some serious learning challenges. She was bigger than I was, taller, and probably weighed 75 pounds more than I do at this point, in 3rd grade. So you can imagine where she was in the pecking order of the class. Well, this young woman picked up the quarter-size bass. She stood up tall, she hunkered over it, and assumed the posture of a seasoned professional and proceeded to pull out beautiful, clear, clean tone. The class, 75 third graders, about 6 adults, went totally silent and then exploded with applause. And that is the moment of conception for junior Appalachian musicians. When that happened, I knew we had to get instruments to kids.
Music, in one form or another, has been played in Alleghany County as long as there have been people living here. It's comforting to know that its traditional forms are as popular today as they ever were, and it doesn't look like that will be changing anytime soon.